DonInLondon, hello, all about AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll be doing a step 4 reading in just a moment, but first the AA preamble, which I share at the beginning of all my videos. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. So that's the reason why I'm doing these readings. So from the 12 and 12, this book, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, I read this many times over in my early days of recovery, and it made no sense at all until I started to practice them. So it is very difficult when we're into AA, new and confounded by alcohol. It's the very last place we probably want it to be, the last chance saloon. Anyway, step 4. Step 4 made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Creation gave us instincts for a purpose. Without them we wouldn't be complete human beings. If men and women didn't exert themselves to be secure in their persons, made no effort to harvest food or construct shelter, there would be no survival. If they didn't reproduce, the earth wouldn't be populated. If there were no social instinct, if men cared nothing for society or of one another, there would be no society. So these desires for sex, for material and emotional security, and for companionship are perfectly necessary and right, and surely God-given. Yet these instincts, so necessary for our existence, often far exceed their proper functions. Powerfully, blindly, many times subtly, they drive us, dominate us, and insist upon ruling our lives. Our desires for sex, material and emotional security, and for an important place in society, often tyrannize us. When thus out of joint, man's natural desires cause him great trouble, practically all the trouble there is. No human being, however good, is exempt from these troubles. Nearly every serious emotional problem can be seen as a case of misdirected instinct. When that happens, our great natural assets, the instincts, have turned into physical and mental liabilities. And for me, when I look at that, when I talk about the instincts, natural instincts for companionship, for love, to be part of something, to be included, taken to extremes where we feel we need to fit in, or we need to control what is going on, these are the extremes of behaviour. So somewhere in the middle there is a balance where it's okay to be included some of the time, some of the time to be in control, but not all of the time. It's about balance and what is appropriate to the situation we're in. And for me, drink drove me to extremes of behaviour, and it enabled me to feel the extremes of feelings, happy or sad, the ups and downs of life. So from great heights of, I suppose, fantasy and happiness, which drink brought on for me, to the depths and the pits of depression, where I couldn't get out on my own. So somewhere in the middle is natural, but when we're growing up and we start drinking, we can get stuck in the old behaviour of extremes and not find natural balance in our relationships. So step 4 is a reckoning, really, of what went on. And this is what it says. Step 4 is our vigorous and painstaking effort to discover what these liabilities in each of us has been and are. We went to find exactly how, when and where our natural desires have walked us. We wish to look squarely at the unhappiness this has caused others and ourselves. By discovering what our emotional deformities are, we can move toward their correction. In other words, getting back to balance, from extremes to balance. Without a willing and persistent effort to do this, there can be little sobriety or contentment for us. Without a searching and fearless moral inventory, Most of us have found that the faith which really works in daily living is still out of reach. And for me, that's faith in doing the next right thing, faith in good conscience working for me, and stopping me falling back into old patterns of anger and resentment when maybe I don't get my way, or I just don't know how to feel right about my life. Before tackling the inventory problem in detail, let's have a closer look at what the basic problem is. Simple examples like the following take on a world of meaning we think about them. Suppose a person places sex desires ahead of everything else. In such a case, this imperious urge can destroy his chances for material and emotional security, as well as his standing in the community. Another may develop such an obsession for financial security that he wants to do nothing but hoard money. Going to the extreme, he can become a miser, or even a recluse who denies himself both family and friends. So we go into isolation, or we extrovert and we're just in everybody's life in a very inappropriate way, trying to control it all. Not meaning to, but wanting desperately to be a part of something. Nor is the quest for security always expressed in terms of money. How frequently we see a frightened human being determined to depend completely on a stronger person for guidance and protection. And that can be difficult when a sponsor is sought by a newcomer, because dependence is not what we're looking for. We're not looking for codependence, where someone has power over us, or we put somebody on a pedestal, and if they don't perform we can knock them off. It's about equality in relationships. This weak one, failing to meet life's responsibilities with his own resources, never grows up. Disillusionment and helplessness are his lot. In time, his protectors either flee or die, and he is once more left alone and afraid. We have also seen men and women who go power mad, who devote themselves to attempting to rule their fellows. These people often throw to the winds every chance for legitimate security and a happy family life. Whenever a human being becomes a battleground for the instincts, there can be no peace. And of course some of us started drinking very much in our younger days and never understood that there was balance, or we came from a background where there was no balance in relationships, and only half of our feelings were ever experienced, those which were appropriate or acceptable to those around us. So we always put a brave face on, covered up our fear, and tried to push through and get to a place of security again. But the problem is, if we don't sort out what our feelings are and we push them down, we just start being robots. And if we don't like where we are, the temptation to drink is great. But if we do like where we are, the temptation can be great too, if we're at extremes of feeling. And the whole point of step 4 is to find out where the balance is. But that is not all of the danger. Every time a person imposes his instincts unreasonably upon others, unhappiness follows. If the pursuit of wealth tramples upon people who happen to be in the way, then anger, jealousy and revenge are likely to be aroused. And certainly I did that, notwithstanding the idea that I was always right. I always thought I was right. And my ability to listen sometimes was lessened because of the way I was treated. Going on, it says, if sex runs riot, there is similar uproar. Demands made upon other people for too much attention, protection and love can only invite domination or revulsion in the protectors themselves, two emotions quite as unhealthy as the demands which evoke them. When an individual's desire for prestige becomes uncontrollable, whether in the sewing circle or at the international conference table, other people suffer and often revolt. This collision of instincts can produce anything from a cold snub to a blazing revolution. In these ways we are set into conflict not only with ourselves, but with other people who have instincts too. And that's one of the things we don't take account of, because we've looked at the world from our own point of view without taking account of others. Although our instincts may be at extremes, trying to fulfill and feel right about ourselves in some way, we then clash with others who are in the same boat. Or we just upset people who just find us overpowering or completely underwhelming. We just don't have We can have too much of a profile or absolutely no profile whatsoever, and it's all fueled by us damping down our feelings with alcohol. Or these days drugs or food or whatever the behaviour is, because it's not exclusive to alcohol. If we can't get alcohol, we'll probably try something else. Anyway, carrying on. Alcoholics especially should be able to see that instinct run wild in themselves is the underlying cause of their destructive drinking. We have drunk to drown feelings of fear, frustration and depression. We have drunk to escape the guilt of passions, and then we have drunk again to make more passions possible. We have drunk for vainglory, that we might the more enjoy foolish dreams of pomp and power. This perverse soul sickness is not pleasant to look upon. Instincts on rampage balk at investigation. In other words, we just don't want to know. The minute we make a serious attempt to probe them, we are liable to suffer severe reactions. And the most severe reaction is when we're looking at our feelings, if ever we got down to it, beyond the mechanical passions and all the rest of it. Our feelings we just didn't understand. So what do? We drown them out with alcohol. Going on, if temperamentally we are on the depressive side, we are apt to be swamped with guilt and self-loathing. We wallow in this messy bog, often getting a misshapen and painful pleasure out of it. As we morbidly pursue this melancholy activity, like I did by writing reams of poetry and letters, and I'm smiling at myself, some of them are quite good, in my own opinion, of course. We may sink to such a point of despair that nothing but oblivion looks possible as a solution, and for me oblivion looked possible every day after a bottle of vodka or two. Here, of course, we have lost all perspective and therefore all genuine humility. And, genuine humility is the ability to keep on learning life with an open mind and an open heart, rather than a closed mind and no heart whatsoever. Here, of course, we have lost all perspective, yes, and therefore all genuine humility. For this is pride in reverse. This is not a moral inventory at all. It is the very process by which the depressive has so often led to the bottle and extinction. But there is another factor to be taken into account. Not everyone comes into this world with a perfect chemistry set. That is, the chemistry set, the endocrine system, which governs and controls the chemicals which make the brain work and our feelings work. So if we don't have the right set of chemicals going on in our heads and we feel clinically depressed, alcohol is a way to oblivion, just to blot it all out. Shut the curtains, lock the doors, don't answer the telephone, and don't open letters. That's how it works. So some people depressed and then drink, some people drink, are depressed and drink more, and then we all drink more. If, however, our natural disposition is inclined to self-righteousness or grandiosity, our reaction will be just the opposite. We will be offended at AA's suggested inventory. No doubt we shall point with pride to the good lives we thought we led before the bottle cut us down. We shall claim that our serious character defects, if we think we have any at all, have been caused chiefly by excessive drinking, when in fact it's the fact that our feelings were never really sorted out. This being so, we think it logically follows that sobriety, first, last and all the time, is the only thing we need to work for. And that's not it. It's not just sobriety, it's what we do next. We believe that our one-time good characters will be revived the moment we cut out alcohol. But what it does, it leaves great big gaps because we used alcohol over and over and over to stop us learning life, because sometimes it was just so painful. If we were pretty nice people all along, except for our drinking, what need is there for a moral inventory now that we are sober? We also clutch at another wonderful excuse for avoiding an inventory. Our present anxieties and troubles, we cry, are caused by the behaviour of other people who really need a moral inventory. We firmly believe that if only they they'd treat us better, we'd be all right. Therefore, we think our indignation is justified and reasonable, that our resentments are the right kind. We aren't the guilty ones, they are. And of course, if we lead our lives saying it was their fault, and pointing at them like that, there's the three fingers pointing back at us. And I didn't realise that was an AA thing until many years into my life. There's so much in AA which I just never realised is part of what life is all about. It's sorting out our feelings. If our feelings fit the time we're having, if our feelings fit the situation, and that they are not, I suppose, overloaded by past experiences and judgments, our feelings are working for us in the situation we're in. And pointing at other people to say it was their fault, or if only they'd be different, isn't going to work. It's just us when it comes to the moral inventory. But the problem is, the more we understand how we are doing a fearless moral inventory, we start not only to judge our own behaviour, and can be quite upset by it, but we start to judge the behaviour of other people. Because the inventory, when looked at for others, can lead us into all sorts of conclusions about their behaviour, and it stops us looking at our own. Anyway, continuing. At this stage of the inventory proceedings, our sponsors come to the rescue. They can do this, for they are the carriers of the AA's tested experience with Step 4. They comfort the melancholy one by first showing him that his case is not strange or difficult, or different rather, that his character defects are probably not more numerous or worse than those of anyone else in AA. This the sponsor promptly proves by talking freely and easily and without exhibitionism about his own defects, past and present. This calm yet realistic stock-taking is immensely reassuring. The sponsor probably points out that the newcomer has some assets, and this is it. We have liabilities and we have assets. We have defects of character and good points of character, which can be noted along with his liabilities. So it's about a balancing of what's good about us and what can we improve. As soon as he begins to be more objective, the newcomer can fearlessly, rather than fearfully, look at his own defects. So it's about being fearless and saying, yes, it's okay to have these defects, providing that I now look at what I need to do next, beyond my drinking behaviour. The sponsors of those who feel they need no inventory are confronted with quite another problem. This is because people who are driven by pride and self unconsciously blind themselves to their liabilities. So if we feel, apart from our drinking, we've been quite exemplary in our behaviour, then pride does get in the way, because we ask ourselves, well, why do I need an inventory? It's those out there who need it. These newcomers scarcely need comforting. The problem is to help them discover a chink in the walls their ego has built, through which the light of reason can shine. So in other words, ego is a way of covering up what's going on inside. It's a sort of brittle shell. But if you can just tap a bit of it and get into what's underneath, that's the feelings. And most of my defects were around fear of being found out as inadequate, putting on a brave face so that people wouldn't hurt me, or I felt I couldn't be hurt, and my ego, which was very brittle, because inside I was full of turmoil, and the only way I switched it off was with drink. And it was always about emotional stuff, romance and finance, and status, I guess. I never realised, because when somebody said, can you do a job, I would say yes, without even knowing. Generally I could do, but that's not the point. It was about finding a position where people accepted me, but I didn't even know that. I was so blinded by what was going on. First off, they can be told that the majority of AA members have suffered severely from self-justification during their drinking days, and I did. Well, I was ignorant first of what was going on, and then denial set in, I guess, when I lost everything. Yeah. For most of us, self-justification was the maker of excuses. Excuses, of course, for drinking and for all kinds of crazy and damaging conduct. And even now I can remember sitting on a park bench with a bag of what I had left, thinking I'd rather not talk to anybody about what's going on, especially family, because I just want to be left alone, and I just don't want to deal with this. And if I just sort of disappear, wouldn't it be better? I just didn't know how to cope anymore. Anyway, this is about sobriety and a bit further in. We had made the invention of alibis a fine art. We had to drink because times were hard or times were good. We had to drink because at home we were smothered with love or got none at all. We had to drink because at work we were great successes or dismal failures. And of course, if you have a success, you can have a dismal failure as well. It goes with the territory. We had to drink because our nation had won a war or lost a peace. And so it went on ad infinitum. For me, it was always about taking the edge off. We thought conditions drove us to drink, and when we tried to correct these conditions and found that we couldn't to our entire satisfaction, our drinking went out of hand and we became alcoholics. It never occurred to us that we needed to change ourselves to meet conditions, whatever they were. So in other words, what is the condition of life today? What's going on in life? And do my feelings actually fit my experience? And do I have the humility to actually look at what's going on and say, how do I fit into this? Or should I be fitting into this? Or what is going on and how do I feel about it? And do my feelings fit reality? Or is something missing? Yes, alcohol leaves a big gap when you stop using it. But in AA we slowly learned that something had to be done about our vengeful resentments, self-pity and unwarranted pride. We had to see that every time we played the big shot, we turned people against us. We had to see that when we harboured grudges and planned revenge for such defeats, we were really beating ourselves with the club of anger we had intended to use on others. So in other words, it was self-defeating because we beat ourselves more severely than we ever beat anybody else. At least we could feel the pain of it. We learned that if we were seriously disturbed, our first need was to quiet that disturbance regardless of who or what we thought caused it, normally with a drink in hand. To see how erratic emotions victimized us often took a long time. We could perceive them quickly in others, but only slowly in ourselves, because it's always easy to look at blaming somebody else. First of all, we had to admit that we had many of these defects, even though such disclosures were very painful and humiliating. Where other people were concerned, we had to drop the word blame from our speech and thought. So it's about my actions, my attitude, my way of dealing with it. Actually, that's not exactly what I mean. It's knowing how I feel about a situation emotionally and having the ability to see it not only through my eyes but the eyes of others. This required great willingness even to begin, but once over the first 2 or 3 hurdles, high hurdles, the course ahead began to look easier, for we had started to get perspective on ourselves, which is another way of saying that we were gaining in humility. So as we unearth the anger, the resentment, the feelings, I suppose it's like a grudge list in many ways, and then finding out, what were the things which were going wrong, what weren't we doing. Normally it was not finding out the whole picture, but only looking at our own bit of it. There you go. Of course, the depressive and the power driver are personality extremes, types with which AA and the whole world abounds. Often these personalities are just as sharply defined as the examples given, but just as often some of us will fit more or less into both classifications. In other words, we can be both, because it depends on the situation. Human beings are never quite alike, so each of us, when making an inventory, will need to determine what his individual character defects are. Those are the liabilities, and not forgetting the assets either. So what it says is, we're all unique and authentic in where we are and how we're developing, because we are unique, authentic human beings. Marvellous. And we all have assets and liabilities to varying degrees. It's the extremes which are the real penalties on us. Having found the shoes that fit, he ought to step into them and walk with new confidence that he is at least on the right track. So that's it, we're on track. We find out what our assets and liabilities are, and we do that with the sponsor, or in my case it was a sponsor, more than one sponsor, but also the benefit of the counsellor as well. And we worked on, well, it took a while, but I stopped fearing it after I started it, and fearless to a degree in the company of others when I realised that I was not alone in these feelings. Now let's ponder the need for a list of the more glaring personality defects all of us have in varying degrees. To those having religious training, such a list would set forth serious violations of moral principles. Some others will think of this list as defects of character. Still others will call it an index of maladjustments. Some will become quite annoyed if there is talk about immorality, let alone sin. But all who are in the least reasonable will agree upon one point, that there is plenty of wrong with us alcoholics, about which plenty will have to be done, if we are to expect sobriety, progress, and any real ability to cope with life. And those words, real ability to cope with life, for me is the spiritual connection to reality. So what is AA all about? Emotional, spiritual and physical well-being, being sober to experience and be able to cope with reality. So spiritual for me is absolutely in the here and now, in the moment. It's everything. And nobody is better or worse at being spiritual. It's whether or not we're connected to what is going on and we haven't got blinkers on. To avoid falling into confusion over the names these defects should be called, let's take a universally recognised list of major human failings, the 7 deadly sins of pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, envy and sloth, or sloth. It is not by accident that pride heads the procession, for pride leading to self-justification, and always spurred by conscious or unconscious fears, is the basic breeder of most human difficulties, the chief block to true progress. Pride lures us into making demands upon ourselves or upon others, which cannot be met without perverting or misusing our God-given instincts. When the satisfaction of our instincts for sex, security and society becomes the sole object of our lives, then pride steps in to justify our excesses. Yes, because pride, false pride, often says, I need to get to the top of the tree of whatever it is and be right and prove myself to be right in my behaviour, in relationships, work, romance, finance, all those things. And pride will justify excess, that I now have the best of everything, including the worst particular habit that will kill me, and that was drinking. And I didn't know it was pride or ego. In the end I couldn't tell the difference. All I knew was I was so unhappy, nothing worked. And I was a lost soul, because I couldn't connect with reality, I didn't know how to love, be loved back, and I wasn't really all that useful. Yeah, that's true. In the final throes of it all, it was horrible. Anyway, going on. All these failings generate fear, a soul sickness in its own right. Fear, a soul sickness in its own right. Then fear in turn generates more character defects. Unreasonable fear that our instincts will not be satisfied drives us to covet the possession of others, to lust for sex and power, to become angry when our instinctive demands are threatened, to be envious when the ambitions of others seem to be realised while ours are not. We eat, drink and grab for more of everything than we need, fearful we shall never have enough. And with genuine alarm at the prospect of work we stay lazy, we loaf and procrastinate, or at best we grudgingly and under half steam. These fears are the termites that ceaselessly devour the foundations of whatever sort of life we try to build, or the life we try to build now. And I'm going to read it again because I think that's important. All these failings generate fear, a soul sickness in its own right. Then fear in turn generates more character defects. Unreasonable fear that our instincts will not be satisfied drives us to covet, that is, to actually try and take more of what is not necessarily ours to have. The possession of others, the lust for sex and power, to become angry when our instinctive demands are threatened, to be envious when the ambitions of others seem to be realized while ours are not. We eat, drink and grab for more of everything than we need, fearful we shall never have enough, and with genuine alarm at the prospect of work we stay lazy. We loaf and procrastinate, or at best we work grudgingly and under half steam. These fears are the termites that ceaselessly devour the foundations of whatever sort of life we try to build. So when AA suggests a fearless moral inventory, it must seem to every newcomer that more is being asked of him than he can do. Both his pride and his fear beat him back every time he tries to look within himself. Pride says, "You need not pass this way," and fear says, "You dare not look." But the testimony of AAs who have really tried a moral inventory is that pride and fear of this sort turn out to be bogeymen, nothing else. In other words, it's in our heads. It's not real. It's not real at all. But it takes a long time to get over our own personal fear, our anger and resentments, because if we don't understand where they're coming from, it's not what they have done, it's how we are responding to it or reacting to it. Yeah, and it took me a long time to get out of that habit. I would be silent about what was going on in my head. I would be silent to people around me. And especially I never learned how to say no, when in fact an emphatic no would have been better than a half-hearted yes. And that's what Gandhi said. Once we have complete willingness to take inventory and exert ourselves to do the job thoroughly, a wonderful light falls upon this foggy scene. As we persist, a brand new kind of confidence is born, and the sense of relief is finally facing ourselves is indescribable. These are the first fruits of step 4. So in other words, I start to know what I'm feeling on a daily basis and why, and what can I do. And it's being assertive. So how am I feeling, why, and what can I do? And if I'm dealing with not only me but everybody else around me, it's important to ask the question, together and included, how do we feel right now? Why? And what can we do? So we get to find out what not only our own feelings are, being assertive, we find out what the feelings of others are around us. So if we're in with a bad lot who have only got the defects of character coming out, like let's race to the finish line and forget everybody else, it may not be appropriate to be in that company, especially if there's a bottle of champagne at the end of it, rather than a feeling that I've done a good job. So, by now the newcomer has probably arrived at the following conclusions: that his character defects representing instincts gone astray have been the primary cause of his drinking and his failure at life, that unless he is now willing to work hard at the elimination of the worst of these defects, both sobriety and peace of mind will still elude him, that all the faulty foundation of his life will have to be torn out and built anew on bedrock. Now willing to commence the search for his own defects, he will ask, just how do I go about this? How do I take inventory of myself? Since step 4 is but the beginning of a lifetime practice, I've got a lot of noises off this morning, I'm sorry about this. It's a lifetime practice, because step 4, when it's done, which is the history, then becomes step 10, which is today. Oh no, you may say, but oh yes, because if we just do a little bit at a time, if we sort it out on a daily basis, it's almost like saying, don't let the sun go down in an argument. We need to clear the decks, otherwise we build up frustrations and put ourselves back at risk of stepping back into our defects of character. It can be suggested that he first have a look at those personal flaws which are acutely troublesome and fairly obvious. Using his best judgment of what has been right and what has been wrong, he might make a rough survey of his conduct with respect to his primary instincts for sex, security and society. So it's the primary instincts. Were they balanced or out of balance? Too much or not enough? Somewhere there is balance given our real life situation. So it's not what we imagine it ought to be, it's what it really is. and where we are. Looking back over his life, he can readily get underway by consideration of questions such as these. When and how, and in just what instances, did my selfish pursuit of the sex relations damage other people and me? And in this modern world, we are encouraged to be, I suppose, profligate. That is, to try and get as much of everything that we possibly can. And we don't take account either of how we feel about that, because we're in a race, or how other people that we're engaging with feel about it as well. Unless, of course, they're in the same race with the same bottle of booze in hand. And that is equally damaging, because we all fall down. What people were hurt, and how badly? Did I spoil my marriage and injure my children? Right, for me, it meant I didn't get married and I didn't have children. Although both of those ideas, I really liked the idea of it, but I feared it at the same time, because if I did marry and have children, where would it lead? And I was too scared to find out, I guess. But I didn't know that. Ignorance is not bliss, for me anyway. Did I jeopardize my standing in the community? Just how did I react to these situations at the time? Did I burn with a guilt that nothing could extinguish? Or did I insist that I was the pursued and not the pursuer, and thus absolved myself? How have I reacted to frustration in sexual matters? When denied, did I become vengeful or depressed? Did I take it out on other people? If there was rejection or coldness at home, did I use this as a reason for promiscuity? The answers to all those questions are driven by fear. We probably do anything to make life work, because we want it to look right so that we can feel right. And I did every sort of combination of trying to make life work, following rules and regulations or moral values that were the current ones of the day, taken to extremes by me, because it seemed the right way to feel right. But it never seemed to work, because the underlying motive was love. But I didn't understand how to love and be loved back. Maybe I know a little bit more about it now. I think I do, actually. Also of importance for most alcoholics are the questions they must ask about their behaviour respecting financial and emotional security. In these areas, fear, greed, possessiveness and pride have too often done their worst. Surveying his business or employment record, almost any alcoholic can ask questions like these. In addition to my drinking problem, what character defects contributed to my financial instability? Did fear and inferiority about my fitness for my job destroy my confidence and fill me with conflict? Not really, because I didn't feel that, but I didn't feel I ever got enough money, and I always ran out of money, and then worked harder to get some more money, and worked even harder and harder, to the exclusion in the end of all relationships. Did I try to cover up those feelings of inadequacy by bluffing, cheating, lying, or evading responsibility? Not really. I just took on more and more and more until I broke down into a heap. Or by griping that others failed to recognise my truly exceptional abilities. Well, yes, that is true of me. Did I overvalue myself and play the big shot? Inadvertently, yes. But I was ignorant that I was doing it, until I then realised exactly what I was becoming. I was becoming like another big shot who was a bully, and that broke me and caused a nervous breakdown, and thank God it did. Did I have such unprincipled ambition that I double-crossed and undercut my associates? Nope, I was never in that position. Was I extravagant? Yes. Did I recklessly borrow money, caring little whether it was repaid or not? Well, I guess when I got to a place where I had no money left and I was helped, and I didn't know how to pay it back, that really upset me, and it took a long time to work out what to do about it. Was I a pinch penny, refusing to support my family properly? Well, No, I didn't do that, but I could have. Did I try to cut corners financially? No. I paid every financial bill in the big world except one, and that's to a family member. That's a discussion which is ongoing through support, emotional and physical support as I can. What about the quick money deals, the stock market and the races? Not really. But I could have, and I had to look deep into all my behaviour around that. Business women in AA will naturally find that many of these questions apply to them too, but the alcoholic housewife can also make the family financially insecure. She can juggle credit accounts, manipulate the food budget, spend her afternoons gambling, and run her husband into debt by irresponsibility, waste and extravagance. And a house husband could do exactly the same thing too. So I don't know that it actually is something that is inapplicable to either sex. But all alcoholics who have drunk themselves out of jobs, family and friends will need to cross-examine themselves ruthlessly to determine how their personality defects have thus demolished their security. The most common symptoms of emotional insecurity are worry, anger, self-pity and depression. And those are normal reactions with normal chemistry sets. So if a person has clinical depression, then those particular emotional symptoms become, I suppose, somatic, I think the word is. They go on and on and on without any sort of respite, and I know that for me that was true. These stem from causes which sometimes seem to be within us, and at other times to come from without. To take inventory in this respect, we ought to consider carefully all personal relationships which bring continuous or recurring trouble. It should be remembered that this kind of insecurity arises in any area where instincts are threatened. So in other words, we can go back to these old behaviours of, why is it happening to me? Oh no, not again. Rather than say, hang on a minute, I've experienced this before. Now, how am I going to be able to respond? And how am I feeling? Why? What can I do? How are we feeling? Why? And what can we do? Questioning directed to this end might run like this, looking at both past and present. What sex situations have caused me anxiety, bitterness, frustration or depression? And I guess for me the major one was a broken heart and not knowing what to do about it. And of course I didn't know. Until you have your heart broken, you don't really know what to do. And even if it's been broken more than once, which mine has, I still didn't know what to do, and I just drank myself into oblivion. And when my heart was broken in recovery, I shared about it a lot. But I didn't blame the other person, I just realised it wasn't going to work out. Appraising each situation fairly, can I see where I have been at fault? Yes. Did these perplexities beset me because of selfishness or unreasonable demands? Yes, because I didn't know what I was demanding, and it was beyond reality. It was a dream. Or if my disturbance was seemingly caused by the behaviour of others, why do I lack the ability to accept conditions I cannot change? So, if other people didn't love me as I thought they ought to, because I was a smashing person, I can't change their attitudes and behaviour. And why should I? I'm attaching myself without justification and without real feeling, except to covet. Very hard to appreciate until we actually see, hang on a minute, we have no right to what is going on. It's just the way it is. And I can only change my outlook, my behaviour and my attitude. And although we may woo people, that is romantically or otherwise, if they don't want to, they don't want to. They don't feel like it. And we have to accept that. So acceptance is a great part of everything. Acceptance of life on life's terms. Yes, these are the sort of fundamental inquiries that can disclose the source of my discomfort and indicate whether I may be able to alter my own conduct and so adjust myself serenely to self-discipline, that is, accepting the reality of life. Suppose that financial insecurity constantly arouses these same feelings. I can ask myself, to what extent have my own mistakes fed my gnawing anxieties? And if the actions of others are part of the cause, what can I do about that? If I am unable to change the present state of affairs, am I willing to take measures necessary to shape my life to conditions as they are? Questions like these, more of which will come to mind easily in each individual case, will help turn up the root causes. So for me, great anxiety in my past about what could be, it was completely insecure and lots of fear, no sort of respite at home and no sort of respite out in the world. So the root cause for me was fear and insecure about even a roof over my head, to the point where I would discard the roof completely in my final drinking days, because I just couldn't cope. But it was from our twisted relations with family, friends and society at large that many of us have suffered the most. We have been especially stupid and stubborn about them, and one of the characteristics of me is stubbornness, definitely. And it was only pointed out to me by my sister, and she was right. This was years ago. She said, the trouble is you're stubborn. And she was right, and I didn't know it. I didn't realise that I was holding on to old viewpoints all the time, and even now I can do that. I can say, back then. And I need to know back then, so I don't recreate an old passion or resentment which has no foundation. See, they do work. Yes, we have been especially stupid and stubborn about them. The primary fact that we fail to recognise is our total inability to form a true partnership with another human being. Gracious me. Yes, I agree. That's me. And I didn't know how for a long, long time. Even now looking back it hurts. And God knows what damage I did, trying to be the perfect boyfriend or partner. The girl I would put on a pedestal. And quite rightly, she got off it and ran away. Anyway, that's good news for her. And really, I appreciate why she did it. Or they did it, because there's more than one, I'm afraid. Our egomania digs two disastrous pitfalls. Either we insist upon dominating the people we know, or we depend upon them far too much. So, woo the girl, try to be right, try to be perfect, and she's got her running shoes on. Or, do whatever she says. Do you fancy going out for a meal? Do you want to go dancing? Shall we go on holiday? And quite rightly, it's boring for another human being just to get a yes person. Who wants that? People need to interact and grow together. Actually, that's a judgment by me, but I suppose it's right in many ways. Partnerships rather than anything else. If we lean too heavily on people, they will sooner or later fail us, for they are human too, and cannot possibly meet our incessant demands. In this way, our insecurity grows and festers. When we have habitually tried to manipulate others to our own willful desires, or especially our point of view, they revolt and resist us heavily. Quite right, because they have their own point of view. Then we develop hurt feelings, a sense of persecution and a desire to retaliate, or in my case, withdraw, run away and find another girl. And I didn't know I was doing this. You know, we set patterns and we just do things, and then we wonder why we don't feel right, and that's because we don't do an inventory or just bounce the ideas of somebody we trust. When we habitually try to manipulate others to our own willful desires, they revolt and resist us heavily. Then we develop hurt feelings, a sense of persecution and a desire to retaliate. As we redouble our efforts to control, or simply flooding them with gifts in my case, and continue to fail, our suffering becomes acute and constant. We have not once sought to be one in a family, to be a friend among friends, to be a worker among workers, to be a useful member of society. Always we try to struggle to the top of the heap, or to hide underneath it. True. This self-centered behaviour blocked a partnership relation with any one of those about us. Of true brotherhood we had small comprehension, because it's based on love, and if we weren't sure about love, how to love and be loved back, then we need to learn with humility every day that passes. So it's not to look back and be so awkward and feel horrible about it. It's to say, thank goodness I've now got a great big gap caused by the reduction in alcohol to zero, and a lot of time to actually understand how to be a human being. Some will object to many of these questions posed because they think their own character defects have not been so glaring, because we just don't see it. We have blind spots so big. To these it can be suggested that a conscientious examination is likely to reveal the very defects the objectionable questions are concerned with, because our surface record hasn't looked too bad. We have frequently been abashed to find that this is so simply because we have buried these self-same defects deep down in us under thick layers of self-justification. Or, in my case, I never actually felt or understood my defects because they were pushed down from me from, I don't know, being 5 years old, where I got the first slap at school. That's when it all started to feel a bit weird. So I buried myself under the heap, as it were, and became average. And then when I got out from under the heap, with a load of ego and pride attached to it, and ironically, with a learning disability, I excelled beyond expectations to overcome it. Anyway, I learned a lot by just reading this. Whatever the defects, they have finally ambushed us into alcoholism and misery. Therefore, thoroughness ought to be the watchword when taking the inventory. And the good news is, once we've got over the initial, what's happened in our history, which has formed the way we are, so with humility we can start to carry on living and learning with humility in step 10, then life takes on new meaning. In this connection, it is wise to write out our questions and answers. It will be an aid to clear thinking and honest appraisal. It will be the first tangible evidence of our complete willingness to move forward. But it's so important to do this. Oh, have I missed a page? No, that's the end of it. So, step 4. I had to go back and do some bits of step 4 because unfortunately my memory had holes in it. And it's not surprising because, you know, if we've spent, in my case, 35 years of drinking, and please don't go as far as that, and please don't go to intensive care, and please don't laugh at people who are trying to save you from yourself. If you're an alcoholic, you know it. And step 4, well, step 1, powerless over alcohol, and life is unmanageable. Step 2, came to believe that power greater than us could restore us to sanity. And that is the universe as you understand it, God as you understand it, not my version of God or the universe or nature. It's what works for you. And what works for me more than anything is sharing and learning from others. So sharing what's on my mind, what's making me angry and resentful and pulling me back into my defects of character, which are fear, brave facing it all, putting on a brave face so people don't see my feelings. An ego, which is the barrier, or ego is, I suppose, pride gone wrong. Yeah. But then, if I have enough courage, faith and confidence in just to be me and live the day, then I have a better chance of letting it happen, being a part of, seeing the possibilities, seeing my choices, what I can and cannot do. And that all feeds into step 5, step 6 and step 7 so beautifully. I don't know who concocted this, or it just came out of the ether, I guess. A lot of people working together, 12 steps. So 1, powerless, unmanageable, if we drink. Came to believe that higher power, conscience, good conscience, nature, providence, God. Your choice. 3, let God and let go. Or rather, let go and let God. Let go and let the world in so that we have a chance. And step 4, the levelling process, that we are absolutely human like anybody else. We have our defects, we've done things we wish we hadn't done, but we only know we wish we hadn't done them because we now know the outcomes, the consequences, and it's the consequences of our drinking which remind us so often that we're better off sober. And if we are sober, then the rest of life can happen, provided, well, the rest of life will happen regardless. It's the quality of the reality we have, the quality of us engaging in reality, the true spiritual connection of living, coping with now. Why did it take me so long to even get a little grasp of that? You can't get it in one go, because you're not perfect, and I'm still learning. As I say, sometimes chunks come back into step 4 and absolutely make me cringe and fear and realise there is probably an amend in there somewhere to someone. Often the amend is the way we behave today rather than how we used to behave. Just being more balanced, hopefully, not living at extremes all the time because they cannot be sustained, and letting ourselves back into life and asking people if we can join in. There you are, step 4 helped me, and it helps me every day just to think about these things in meditation. But most often it's my emotional feelings and spiritual connection to reality which is so important. So if I ask myself when I wake up, how am I feeling? Why? What can I do? It helps me. But then I do step 1, step 2, step 3, just a very brief summary in my head, followed by the Serenity Prayer, or even including the I am responsible pledge, which is I am responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there, and for that I am responsible. The Serenity Prayer to God, or as you understand, your higher power, be it the universe, nature, providence, good conscience, your best friend, or not a human. I think the higher power has to be a collective understanding of what is good overall, and not what is good for me. That's how I see it anyway. So to God, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference from things like this 12 steps and 12 traditions only works for today, and mostly in the moment of now, where spiritual is always happening. It's just the quality of how real it is for us that is important.